Okay, let's move on to our second topic, which is electronic discovery planning sessions, which will take place, hopefully, very shortly thereafter when you receive your data.
Thank you. This is one of those, you don't know what you don't know. You've got tapes where you think you've got stuff on them. You bought a company years ago, and you got their IT department, became part of your company. They shipped a box full of tapes. You sent it off to Iron Mountain or some other storage facility, and they're sitting out there. And you have no idea what's on those tapes. What you have to do is what was said before by Gail. You got to have a data map. You got a plan. You got to know what's out there. Ignorance is not an excuse. It's a liability. And you have to go ahead and get ahead of the curve, know what's on your data tapes, know where everything resides in your organization, because if you don't, you're playing with fire.
My comment on this would be when you're having an initial meeting or planning session with your clients, to make sure that the right players are at that table. And that, in addition to your legal team, would include your client and your client's IT representative at that initial meeting. Because what I found is the interpretation from lawyer to client to IT is like a game of telephone. And when it gets to the person who's actually collecting the data, you're probably not hearing the same story as what is really necessary. So it's important to ask all those individuals, in addition to client representatives, or what a lot of internal departments call business units, to be present at the initial meeting about document collection, data collection.
I just wanted to say something about what Gail said there too, having the IT people involved. Make sure that the IT people that are involved are people that actually understand the network and know what's on there. A lot of times I've seen junior level IT guys that are attend these meetings just because it's a small matter and hey, they just need to collect a couple custodians and some data, and they really don't understand what's involved here. So having somebody that's of a senior level or somebody that understands the network and the topology of the network, I think is very important.
I think there's a couple things going on here during these planning sessions. When you have folks sitting down, and this is what we talked about on the previous panel, you have IT people talking with lawyers or lit support people or paralegals, and IT people who have been frustrated for years and years because they've had to learn the words interrogatory and request for production, and so now they're all getting back at you. They're all getting back at the legal profession by talking about gigabytes and terabytes and servers and platforms and software. And it's the dynamics in the rooms of these meetings can be overwhelming. And sometimes you need a peacemaker in there, someone who is saying, is this what you're asking? Is this what you're telling me? I can't tell you how many times attorneys have left meetings believing that they have had a full disclosure of a network. And I will tell you, one of our smaller clients had a group of engineers that decided on their own, for some reason, they wanted to have their own email system. But they didn't tell anybody in the corporate offices that they had this email system. And what happened after this conferring, where we were mapping out everything, we just happened to go for a cup of coffee after. And I said, wow, this is really a technical job that you do. They said, yeah, we have our own server, we have our own stuff, and yeah, we have our own email system. What? And so we had to pull everybody back into the meeting at 6 o'clock in the evening and say, okay, we need to talk about this. We found 4 servers that we didn't even know about. And this is the kind of stuff, in small companies, it happens a lot because you don't have that centralized core of IT people. You don't have the lay down the law, you will not use this platform, or you have to do things a certain way. So it gets a little confusing, and sometimes not even the IT folks, especially if that IT is outsourced to a third party, it can get very confusing as to what's where and who's in charge of it, who has access to it. And one of the things that I have found in cases is that when attorneys confer with the other side up front, and say, what are you looking for here? And they go to their clients, they find out exactly what we have. Sometimes going on the offensive right away is going to save you money, because you're going in, you're conferring, you're finding everything that you need to find, knowing exactly what kind of volume you're dealing with, what kind of systems you're dealing with, can save you so much money, because you know up front, we can't do this because it's going to cost this much money. You've already gotten your pricing proposals from different vendors, you've already identified what needs to get done, and you've done the first rule of project management, which is begin with the end in mind. Where do I want to end up when this process is over? And you can go in then to your 26 conference and say, I'm not going to provide this to you because it's going to cost me X amount. My volume for my custodians is way too much. We have to limit it. We can limit it by the number of people we're collecting from to begin with. We can go in waves. Here's my top 2, things like that. So there's different ways that you can sit down and say, how can we limit our costs up front? And I agree that with smaller companies, it's sometimes more of a personal vendetta than it is anything else. But big companies have small cases too. And so it all depends on the players, what you're doing, and where you want to go.
One final point on the planning up front is, in the event that you do get to a stage where you've set out your cost plan, as Sue just mentioned, for the collection, and it perhaps exceeds the value and you haven't had any success talking to the other side about limiting it, if you do need to get to the judge, you don't want to go before them without having a sound cost estimate in place to show that your cost will indeed exceed the value of the case. I think that's a very good strategy to have in place so that a judge can see, in fact, that we need to get to our next topic, which is how do we narrow the scope of this production.
I wanted to add one thing as it relates to the intersection of IT and legal. One of the frustrations that I had when I was general counsel of a couple of companies was that there really wasn't a commonality of thought between IT and legal. And IT believes what they heard was to save everything. And what legal is saying, no, you don't need to save anything, just save this stuff. But nobody goes ahead and has that kumbaya session with everyone to sit down and say, what are you really doing, and the follow-up. The same thing happens in small, medium-sized companies. You have limited resources and limited equipment. With the economic hardships that this country is facing right now, people are losing their jobs. Computers are left behind. Well-intentioned, lower-level IT people might say, I need to get that computer ready for the next guy who comes along. So he wipes out the hard drive. Litigation hold letters were sent out once, 6 months ago when the case first came in, but nobody bothered to send them again and again and again and again. These are the challenges that you have not only with the small and medium-sized companies, but with larger companies as well.
The one thing I will add to this topic is it's also very important to have internal planning sessions with your attorneys. And the reason I say this is our attorneys believe sometimes they know what lit support can do. So they go to their meet and confers and they say, of course litigation support can process this amount of data in this amount of time. And they come back to us and say, this is what we promised. And we look at them and say, it's not possible. So I think one of the general themes of this panel is plan early, plan well, and it will work out. Everything will be okay. The most expensive thing in litigation support is to do things twice and to do them over. So plan early, plan well, and plan often.